Hello, everyone. Uh, as Yuki said, my name is Zack Koppert. I'm a senior software engineering manager at GitHub. I've worked with many InnerSource programs at previous jobs, either starting at them or working at them. Also, currently at GitHub, working on InnerSource things, as well as with many GitHub customers. So I want to share that experience with you so that you know what perspective I'm talking from today. And speaking of today, I wanted to talk with you about the question that has puzzled myself and many others in the inner source community. Can you actually measure inner source? I also make no claim to know everything about this, but I do claim to be somebody who has tried again and again and want to share what I've learned with you. So let's get to it. Can you measure inner source? Here's the agenda for what we'll cover today. We're going to talk about the problem of measuring inner source, why it's so hard to solve, what's at stake if we don't solve it, what we're leaving on the table, to say it another way, um, the solution framework that I've come up with that has helped me make some progress, and also some tricks that I've learned, pitfalls that I think that you should avoid, and tools. So let's start with the problem. Uh, when I first pitched an InnerSource program at a previous company, I was able to convey the need for InnerSource by demonstrating how much rework we were doing over and over again across departments. It wasn't good for engineers. It didn't feel good that we were doing the same work as other folks, and it didn't feel good on the management side because it's waste. It turns out the CEO didn't like rework and waste when I talked to him about it, so we did get a conditional approval, which is very exciting. The condition was this: figure out how to measure if it's working. I walked out of that meeting, like I said, very excited about the approval, but also terrified. I had no idea how to measure if InnerSource was working, what was good enough for working, what does working look like? Yeah, any of that sound familiar? I know that this story isn't unique in talking to so many different GitHub customers, as well as other fellow InnerSource advocates here in the InnerSource Commons. I've heard from many others, in fact, that that face the exact same challenge of uh, they think that this is a good idea and they would like us to measure how successful our steps towards it are going to be. So I'd like to show you how I've been approaching this problem and the framework that I've been working on, and how you might be able to use it as well to start measuring inner source, or change the way perhaps that you're currently measuring inner source, and thinking about what success looks like. So let me start with a confession. Measuring inner source is genuinely difficult. Not just a little bit, not technically tricky. It is genuinely complex. And I think that there are three core reasons why. First, the complexity problem of it is inner source isn't just about code. It's about culture, collaboration, knowledge sharing, uh, business outcomes, and like we've heard from other talks about all of those different aspects, right? Um, Unlike traditional software metrics where you might measure uptime, which is an exact number, error rates, which are also an exact number, or maybe bug counts in the software, all very quantifiable. Inner source success spans across multiple dimensions that are not easily quantified sometimes, and that are also inherently interwoven together. So second is the timing problem. Measurement of when inner source is happening needs to happen with an awareness of the current team structures. Think about like organizational reporting charts, some folks call them, at the point in time when the contribution is made. So let me illustrate to you why that's important, if that's not something that you've ran into before. So imagine that two people are working on the same project on the same team, um, working against something that's on their team's roadmap, product A, we'll call it. That wouldn't necessarily be considered inner source if we were just creating features on product A together, both assigned to that thing. However, take those same two people, put them on different teams developing different products in different parts of the organization who both need to be able to come up with a button or a widget. and they need to maybe use those for two different things or on, like I said, across two different products. And they collaborate together across organizational structure to develop some code that they can both use, develop some designs that they can both use. And in reality, those individuals may change over time, right? So at the time of contribution, they may have been on different teams. Fast forward 10 years later, and they may be on the same team. And so if you try to remeasure that inner source, the context of where they were in the organization is lost. So if it wasn't clear, that second example was an example of what most would consider inner source. So all that to say that measuring inner source activity requires context about the team structures at the time of contribution. And if that's not tricky enough for you yet, there is still a third problem that makes this difficult. In order to measure inner source, we have to define the relevant terms, which means you need to be clear on what an inner source contribution is, thinking about like code and documentation. Most folks agree that those fit in categories that can be inner sourced. What about when somebody reviews code instead of generates code? Is that inner sourcing? Maybe they're on a different team. What about if somebody contributes a thought or has a discussion with you? Can that be considered an inner source contribution? It gets tricky. So defining your terms is really important, specifically with an inner source contribution and what that means. What can be considered an inner source project or not as well, if you're going to start labeling projects as inner source or not. So code bases, libraries, data sets. Again, there's gray area in these definitions in that, what about using the same platform or same tools or same configuration for those tools? What amount of sharing and what subject of what you're sharing constitutes inner source? I try to be really clear on these terms so that we know what to include when we try to measure inner source. Otherwise, if we were to measure inner source without defining these terms, we might be measuring smaller or larger than someone else's definition. So extremely important. And then not only the subject, the inner source contribution or the inner source project that you're talking about, but what about what success looks like, right? So if we're going to start measuring something, what are we measuring it against? And what is the outcome that we want? Well, if we want inner source practices to be flourishing, and we're working to quantify that into numbers, what does good look like? What if I told you that an inner source project had 5% of its contributions were from external to the team that owns it? They were considered inner source contributions by one definition. Would that be good? Would that be bad? What about 50% or 90%? Is there too much, right? So all of these things need to be clearly defined, and they're best defined in the organization that you're trying to measure them at. Getting around the table with your stakeholders and saying, we want to define these terms because it's important that we measure all of what we're trying to increase here. So if you can come through and get a definition, next is what's at stake, right? We've established that the problem's hard to solve. We have to define terms and goals. Do we still want to do this? Is it worth it to measure inner source, or should we say it's unquantifiable? To answer that, we need to know what's at stake if we don't measure it. And this is where it gets personal for me. I've worked with numerous different organizations with inner source programs that have been canceled or significantly reduced because stakeholders couldn't see the tangible value that was being delivered by dedicating resources, time, energy, money, funds towards furthering inner source within the organization. The problem seemed clear, but it wasn't clear that we were solving the problem or how well we were solving the problem. When you can't demonstrate your return on investment, to use a common term, programs lose funding and support. That's not like a measurement problem anymore. That becomes a sustainability problem for InnerSource in your organization. So the good news, there is good news, is that I've also supported organizations that do measure their impact on furthering InnerSource practices in their organization, and that they've also been more successful in receiving continued funding. They're demonstrating their return on investment through both anecdotal stories that they can tell and some measured data in order to have an impactful and compelling story and data to back it up. So the question that I ask, that some of you might be asking as well, is how do we become one of those success stories? How do we lean towards creating impactful, compelling stories that are backed up with data to demonstrate enough for us to dedicate ourselves and focus energy on furthering InnerSource in an organization? So let's take a look. I've built a tool to help with this called Measure InnerSource to attempt to solve the measurement problem. Through using it across multiple organizations, I've learned that successful InnerSource measurement comes down to 3 core areas. So let me show you what exactly this tool measures and how you can use it. There are 3 measurements. This wouldn't be a conference presentation if it weren't 3 points. So there you go. Measurement number 1 is cross-team participation. The tool measures cross-team participation, which answers the fundamental question, is InnerSource actually happening? The Measure InnerSource tool automatically identifies contributors to repositories, maps them to teams using your organizational structure, and then categorizes contributions as either from the team that owns this repository or external to the team, determining that or assuming that external contributions from outside of the nuclear team that owns it are considered InnerSource. And then it also calculates your InnerSource ratio and then reports all of this in a markdown or JSON format. So in terms of the InnerSource ratio, to be clear, that's the percentage of work done by external teams. So for example, in one report I generated, we discovered that while a repository had 25 total contributors, only 8 were from the owning team. That's a 68% participation rate of InnerSource participation. So the tool shows exactly who those external contributors were and which teams they came from, demonstrating InnerSource was occurring, answering our core question for this measurement, is InnerSource actually happening? Measurement number 2 is contribution volume. The tool gives you a complete picture of InnerSource activity by counting commits, code changes and improvements, pull requests, feature additions and bug fixes, as well as issues, bug reports, and feature requests, working on expanding it to also GitHub discussions. But it's not there yet. Still evolving. Here's what makes this powerful. The tool breaks down contributions by individual contributors so that you can see patterns. Are your InnerSource contributors making substantial code contributions, or are they primarily filing issues? Are certain external teams contributing more than other teams? This granular data helps you understand the quality, the depth, and the uniqueness of your cross-team collaboration. So one example is I ran this on a repository that showed 23 total InnerSource contributions, 15 commits, 5 pull requests, and 3 issues, coming from 4 different teams across the organization. So that tells a valuable story about meaningful technical contribution rather than casual flyby engagement because of those qualities, right? Commits and pull requests rather than only issues and discussions. Finally, measurement 3, that's cross-repository impact. So here's where the tool becomes really powerful for demonstrating business value. Run it across multiple repositories to identify which projects attract the most InnerSource collaboration. These can be categorized as your high-value shared assets from a business perspective. Which teams are the most active as InnerSource contributors? These are your collaboration champions, right? The ones who not only hold the ideals, but also collaborate in practice. Which repositories have low InnerSource ratios? These could be opportunities for improvement or be identifying something that serves a single purpose for a single product. And that's okay too. Remember, this is all about how you define your success metrics, right? We don't have to have everything must be InnerSource, but we want to look at furthering InnerSource practices and increasing the quality of our InnerSource. All of these things lead to your return on investment calculation that I was talking about before. So let's say you run the tool on 20 repositories, find an average of a 35% InnerSource ratio that pops out in the report for you. That means that 35% of your development work is being shared across team boundaries. Woohoo! That's great. That's reduced duplication, shared maintenance costs, and faster innovation through that collaboration. Imagine taking that number down to 0. That's demonstrating no InnerSource, no shared assets. That means that that illustrates that we're duplicating effort and wasting resources if we believe that there is anything that could be shared. So now, before I show you how to implement this, let me save you some from some of the mistakes that I see organizations make all the time. And by that, I mean, mistakes that I've made in the past. So some common pitfalls, what not to do. So the 3 most dangerous measurement mistakes that I've seen others make, and chiefly I've made myself, is the first one, I call it get-itis. Folks saying, oh, we have 10,000 commits this quarter. InnerSource is working. And Git activity is not always able to be categorized or comprehensive on its own. It's also a lagging indicator at best, can often be misleading. High commit volume might indicate inefficient development practices or even unhealthy collaboration if somebody is, let's say changing something, twiddling bits, some folks call it, and trying to get something to work on their own without seeking collaboration with somebody else, right? Just one example. Mistake number 2 is vanity metrics. So being able to say the total number of repositories or the total contributors without context. That's like measuring your company's success by counting how many meetings you have. It's not tied directly to the meaningful outcomes. And then mistake number 3 is the measurement death spiral. Over measuring and then over measuring and over measuring and underacting. I've been guilty of this before, that by the time I get the measurements I'm looking for the month, that it's time to take the next measurements for the next month to see how they've changed, and never setting aside time to act. So I have one question that I ask myself about metrics when I'm collecting them as sort of a litmus test, and that's based on the data that we've collected, what should we do differently next month? And then do that. And then measure again. And if that means that you're skipping months or weeks or whatever your cadence for measuring is, that's fine. We want to measure to see if we've improved, not just to measure to measure. Let me talk a little bit more about the tool and how you could implement it as well. So the tool, like I said, is called Measure InnerSource. It's at github.com/github/measure-InnerSource. It's a mouthful. But that's what it is. It's completely free and open source. It can either run locally or as a GitHub action. It can automatically calculate those InnerSource ratios that we've been talking about and generates that markdown report. It also handles large repositories as well. If you're concerned about, oh, we have a mono repo or something like that, there's some cool algorithms in there that help with that. So what you need to get started essentially is a file mapping your team's structure. If that sounds daunting, if you're a part of a large organization, don't worry. You don't have to like write down who everyone's manager is across the whole organization and get that into the tool. You can start with just the contributors that show up in a repository and work from there. There's also another path, which is taking your data out of your people management software like Workday or Microsoft and getting that into a JSON format that represents your organizational structure at the time. Then the tool can use that to see where folks land on which team they land, so it can detect if InnerSource is occurring or not. So essentially, you could sit down in 30 minutes, put together a quick, the file's called org data or organizational data .json. Put that together, copy the open source workflow file or download the repository and run it locally. And then you're off to the races. It'll generate your first InnerSource report for you. So before you leave today, I want to leave you with 2 questions and a challenge. Would running this tool and getting this information help convey the value of your InnerSource program that you're running? Would measuring InnerSource in this way help you make better decisions to improve your InnerSource program? If either of those are yes, then my challenge is find some time on your calendar to take a look at the tool or another tool that you found. And I challenge you that because getting started for me was almost as hard as creating this tool. And I know that it can be for others. So wanted to leave you with that challenge. And here's the bottom line. What I want you to remember, the problem of measuring InnerSource is genuinely hard. It requires defining terms, understanding context, focusing on meaningful outcomes, but it's absolutely worth the effort to demonstrate and increase the value of the InnerSource that's happening in your practice. InnerSource measurement isn't about agreeing on ideals. It's about demonstrating the values or the value exchange that occurs. So I appreciate you guys for being here. Thank you for giving me your precious time. I'd love to hear about your InnerSource measurement journeys and attempt to answer any questions that you might have.